When thinking about the Resident Evil series, most people over the age of 30 think about the original from 1996, the progenitor of all survival horror that came after, complete with fun yet disturbing monsters, great atmosphere, and voice acting that would make the hair on the back of your neck stand on end. OG Resident Evil is truly a timeless classic. Follow that up with the director's cut. The horror is intensified with addition of a range mode, which swapped item and key locations around the mansion, giving veteran players a renewed sense of stress as they have every single one of their expectations subverted. In a good way. Not this way. Beginner mode, which is just how it sounds, and other small things like faster zombies and additional enemies. This version also added the most memorable track in Resident Evil history, Clown Farts. Yes, clown farts. If you don't know what it is, look it up. Or don't, as I will be gracing you with its lovely sound for the rest of this video. Enjoy. All in all, Resident Evil was great. It would set the ground for an all-new genre, and was followed up with fantastic sequels like Resident Evil 2 and 3. Both great games in their own right. However, despite how good these games were, after learning which direction the series would eventually go, it's not hard to see the trends being set early. Even as early as Resident Evil 2, players could tell that the series was heading for a far more action-oriented experience. That is not necessarily a bad thing, because 2 and 3 are still great. 3 has some problems, mostly with the formula becoming a bit iterative. That's not to mention Code Veronica, which I won't, by the way. That pile of zombie poop can burn along with Duke Nukem Forever and Aliens Colonial Marines. But by the time that RE4 came out, the formula, quote-unquote, of Resident Evil was supposedly getting tired, and Capcom, thinking that they needed to change things up, brought in old talent in Shinji Mikami, creator of Resident Evil and Dino Crisis. You see, for Resident Evil 2 and 3, the position of director had been given to Hideki Kamiya, who, in his initial attempt to make Resident Evil 4, ended up creating this YouTube creator's favorite game series of all time, to be discussed in a later video. As a result, direction went back to Mikami, and development on Resident Evil 4 started anew. It is unknown when the decision to make the game action-oriented took place, but skip ahead several months and you have the release of what few would deny to be one of, if not the most influential game of the early 21st century. Resident Evil 4 was released to roaring approval, gaining new fans and bringing back old ones that had recently fallen out with the series. It won Game of the Year in 2005 in several publications, and is considered one of the greatest video games of all time. But much like how the sequel trilogy can give someone a new appreciation of the prequels, what came after Resident Evil 4 can undermine what it originally accomplished. Now, don't get me wrong, I do not think that Resident Evil 4 is a bad game. The first few hours, surviving the village and the lake as a battle-hardened and cooler version of the babyface nerd from RE2, is some of the most iconic and Resident Evil-y gameplay there is. That can't be denied. And despite what may seem overall a very harsh title for this video, I truly loved this part of the game. Even now, 15 years later, it stands as the pinnacle of the Resident Evil series. However, not all is bullets, herbs, and fate sprays. Because, despite its opening excellence, Resident Evil 4 showcases what would eventually almost kill the franchise. And I believe that its future hardships can all be pinpointed to one single cutscene. Barely 5 seconds long, it still manages to carry with it untold disaster for the future.
Looking like a double-wide surprise. God damn.
This scene, which now seems so small, is why Resident Evil almost died. I'm not going to go into the garbage that is RE5 and 6. That story's been told. What I am proposing is that Resident Evil 4 is not as good as we remember, that it falls apart in the final third of the game. This scene is just the sign of what's to come. The control scheme of Resident Evil 4 is much the same as they were in the games before it. Now, it may not seem to be the case, but the tank controls of the previous games carry over to 4. The perspective on it has merely changed, as is how you shoot enemies, but that is self-evident. This is not a review of the controls themselves, because depending on the part of the game you're playing, they can be great. The slow, methodical movement lends itself well to survival horror. It makes enemies getting closer to you a real threat, and makes your movements more purposeful when choosing what action to take. As we would learn in RE3 Remake, the addition of a dodge feature goes a long way in eliminating much of the stress when dealing with the undead. So, for much of the game, this works out great, but as soon as this cutscene plays, you enter what ends up being a new game entirely. As a result, the controls not only no longer work, but they are downright counterproductive. Stuck only moving back to front at one time is hard enough with very mobile monsters. Add in enemies that can shoot you from across the map, it's damn near impossible. Not to mention, the act of shooting itself takes about 20 seconds to aim. And you have a task that would earn RE4 the Dark Souls of survival horror moniker if it was released today. Now, to be fair, Kill Switch came out only a year before RE4, and as the first game credited to feature any sort of cover system, it can be forgiven for RE4 for not having any substantial cover system. Now, there are certain points in the game where you are allowed to take cover. However, these points are specific and do not constitute a system so much as an action you take by pressing A behind a waist-high box. Without a proper cover system, the game's already tank-like controls become unusable. Having to dodge a hail of gunfire while carefully choosing a direction to go in a straight line toward is something I can only describe as unfair. The talent they had on this game, led by Mikami, should have been able to figure out a solution to this. They could have added a cover system like they kinda did in Resident Evil 5, or better yet, they could have scrapped the segment entirely as it deviated so heavily from the core of what made Resident Evil good. What can be said about the game's massive reliance on QTEs? They were young then, just coming into their own, and people had yet to catch on that what they were being used for was a crutch by developers to make games more quote-unquote interactive. That said, RE4 had so many different QTEs. I sometimes feel that Mikami and the gang didn't just throw them in there for shits and giggles. QTEs were never that impressive to begin with, and yet for some reason this game is awash with them. There is one for every situation, from attacking to running to dodging. Even the cover they allow you, that I previously mentioned, was done in the same way as a QuickTime event. You never stay in cover. You have to press cover at the exact right time, because Leon has decided that you only need to stay crouched for about 5 seconds as men shoot at you and lob dynamite in your general direction. Everything in this game is accompanied by some sort of QTE, and it wears on you fast. Playing it now, I find it hard to find any enjoyment in the game anymore once I pass the village. Okay, look. I am sure that there is going to be a plethora of RE stans who will excuse these issues for a multitude of reasons. And that's fine. As I said, I like the game, and playing it after all this time does bring back good memories. But it also brought on why I originally grew tired with the game and why I was so reluctant to play it again. Every year in October, I make it a point to play all the Resident Evil games I have in chronological order. And when I got to 4, a sense of dread came over me, one that I couldn't pinpoint at the time. It wasn't until I got to the island where it hit, and I died again and again trying to run for cover. But what do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you like videos like this, well, let me know that too. And if you do, feel free to subscribe.